Right then, let's dive straight in, shall we? Tonight, we're plunging headfirst into the fog-choked alleys of Victorian London on the trail of, perhaps, the most infamous unsolved mystery in history, Jack the Ripper.
Oh, absolutely. A case that, even after a century, still has this incredible grip on our imaginations.
It really does. And I think what makes this deep dive so fascinating is, well, we're not just going to rehash the same old story.
Right. It's not just a whodunit, is it?
No, no, no. We've got a whole stack of sources here ready to take us beyond the sensational headlines, right into the heart of Whitechapel in 1888 to understand what life was really like back then.
A place where I'd say poverty and desperation were, well, they were as thick as that famous London fog.
Now, that's a fantastic image. So to really set the scene for our listeners, imagine this: 80,000 people all crammed into a single parish.
Can you imagine struggling to survive in conditions that, frankly, most of us today couldn't even fathom?
It's true. I mean, the child mortality rate alone was just staggering.
55% before the age of 5.
55%. Just think about that for a moment. Then you've got robbery, violence, alcohol dependency, all absolutely rife.
It truly was a breeding ground for fear and, well, utter despair.
And of course, for many women, prostitution was, well, it was the only way they could survive.
Absolutely. Our sources indicate there were something like 62 brothels in Whitechapel alone.
62. And that's not even counting the estimated 1,200 women working the streets. It's a truly stark reminder of the desperate circumstances they faced.
One detail that really stuck with me from the sources was, well, this picture of 8,500 people
8,500.
act every night into just 233 common lodging houses,
Good heavens.
sleeping in, get this, coffin beds,
Coffin bed.
or even on ropes strung across the dormitories.
That's just unimaginable.
It really is almost impossible to fathom the squalor and vulnerability these people endured.
So you're painting a very vivid picture here. A community teetering on the edge, and then Jack the Ripper enters the scene.
Exactly. It's not simply about a series of murders. It's about understanding this entire social context, the fears, the anxieties of the time, and then, of course, how all of that was amplified by the media frenzy that erupted.
Okay, so let's talk about the murders themselves. Now, there were 11 Whitechapel murders in total, but the canonical 5, committed between August and November of 1888, are the ones most closely linked to Jack the Ripper. What makes these 5 stand out?
Well, while there's still debate on whether all 11 are linked, the canonical 5, they share some chilling similarities.
Yes, and there's that escalating brutality, isn't there?
Precisely. And they all occur within a relatively short time frame, suggesting a very concentrated period of activity.
Right. So let's take a closer look at each victim and the circumstances of their death, shall we? Now, listener, I must warn you, some of these details are rather gruesome.
The first victim was Marianne Nichols, found on the 31st of August with her throat slashed and, well, her abdomen partially ripped open. A truly horrific discovery that, well, it sent shockwaves through the community.
Absolutely. But sadly, it was just the beginning. Just a week later, Annie Chapman was found murdered. Again, her throat was slashed, but this time, her abdomen was entirely open.
And some of her organs had been placed on her shoulders.
Yeah, significant escalation, wouldn't you say?
Oh, without a doubt. It points to a growing boldness, perhaps even, dare I say, a perverse sense of theatricality on the part of the killer.
And then, on September 30th, you have the infamous double event.
Yes. Elizabeth Stride, she was found with her throat slashed, but interestingly, no further mutilations.
So was the killer interrupted, do you think?
That's certainly a theory. However, just 45 minutes later, Catherine Eddowes was found murdered just a short distance away, and this time, the brutality, well, it was even more pronounced.
Her throat cut, abdomen ripped open, intestines on her shoulder.
Face mutilated, and a section of her ear actually cut off.
It's just horrifying.
The police surgeon at the time, he estimated that these mutilations would have taken at least 5 minutes to complete.
5 minutes. To think of the killer taking that much time, inflicting such horrific injuries, it's just chilling.
It speaks to a level of depravity that's hard to grasp, really. And then, of course, there's the final and most brutal case of all, Mary Jane Kelly.
Found in her own room on November 9th.
Her face was unrecognizable, her body almost entirely eviscerated, and her heart missing from the crime scene.
The stuff of nightmares.
The level of violence in Kelly's case was truly unprecedented. Perhaps because the murder took place indoors, the killer had more time, felt less pressure to finish quickly.
A chilling thought. But it's important to remember that these weren't just random acts of violence. The fact that the murders often occurred on or near weekends, at the end of the month, and with increasingly brutal mutilations, well, it suggests a level of planning, a deliberation that makes the case even more unsettling.
Absolutely. This wasn't simply a madman lashing out. There was a pattern, a chilling method to this madness. And it's this calculated cruelty coupled with the mystery surrounding the killer's identity that continues to both fascinate and horrify us even today. It's fascinating, isn't it? The impact these murders had on the public imagination.
Yeah, the Ripper case really did become a media sensation, unlike anything that came before.
Oh, it did.
And our sources really highlight the role of these new, cheap mass circulation newspapers.
Absolutely. It was the perfect storm, really. You have these newspapers eager to capitalize on the public's, well, almost thirst for information.
And fear, I imagine.
Yes, fear as well, and they often resorted to, let's be honest, sensationalism, pure speculation.
They didn't hold back on the gruesome details either.
Oh no, quite the opposite. They published graphic descriptions, sometimes even, embellishing the details.
To make them even more horrifying.
To make them even more horrifying, exactly.
Almost like they were creating a monster.
Well, they were, in a way.
Giving him a name, a persona that, in the end, transcended reality.
Precisely. And then you have the letters.
Hundreds of them, right?
Hundreds pouring into the police, some claiming to be from Jack himself.
I can't imagine trying to sift through all of that.
Oh, an absolute nightmare, especially back then with no real forensic techniques.
No fingerprinting, no DNA analysis.
Relying almost entirely on witness statements, which were often, well, unreliable at best.
And often contradictory.
Often contradictory, yes. And then you have the environment itself.
Whitechapel, you mean?
Yes, Whitechapel. The sheer density of the place, the narrow alleys, the dimly lit streets, all of that made securing crime scenes and gathering evidence incredibly challenging.
Absolutely. And I suppose all of that just adds to the challenge the police were already facing.
Oh, absolutely.
Our sources mention over 2,000 people interviewed, over 300 investigated, and 80 actually detained.
And yet, despite all that, Jack remained elusive.
It's incredibly frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah.
And all of that, I imagine, just fueled public frustration even further.
It did. And ultimately, that frustration led to the formation of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee.
Now tell me a little more about them.
Well, it was a group of local businessmen, residents, who felt, well, let's just say they felt the police weren't doing enough.
So they decided to take matters into their own hands.
Precisely.
A sort of Victorian-era neighborhood watch, but perhaps with a little more
Gusto.
gusto, yes.
They patrolled the streets, offered rewards for information, even hired private detectives.
They were determined to catch Jack.
They were.
It's quite fascinating to see how this fear, this uncertainty, really galvanized the community into action.
It is. Whether they actually uncovered anything useful is debatable.
But it does speak volumes about the level of fear and distrust that had gripped the community.
Oh, absolutely. And then, of course, amidst all of this, you have the theories.
Oh, yes. Everyone had a theory about Jack's identity.
Was it a butcher? A doctor? A member of the royal family, even? The speculation was endless.
One of the most persistent theories was that Jack must have had medical knowledge.
Oh, yes. The way he removed organs from his victims, it led to speculation that he might have been a surgeon.
Or at least someone with anatomical expertise.
It's certainly a chilling thought.
Did the police ever find any evidence to support that?
Interestingly, no. One of the police surgeons, Thomas Bond, examined the bodies quite thoroughly and concluded that while Jack didn't possess any specialized medical knowledge,
So much for the evil surgeon theory.
not likely, no. Bond believed that the mutilations, while gruesome, were not performed with any real surgical precision.
He attributed them more to a frenzied animalistic rage than to, well, any calculated skill.
Exactly.
But I suppose some understanding of the human body was necessary, wouldn't you say?
Of course. But that knowledge, well, it wouldn't have been unique to a surgeon or a butcher back then.
Good point.
Anatomical diagrams were readily available, and many people would have had some basic understanding of anatomy, particularly those who worked in professions like, say, slaughtering or undertaking.
That's a very good point. It seems like the public's imagination was running wild, fueled by fear, and, well, a lot of speculation.
Absolutely. And the media, with its sensationalized reporting, well, they only added fuel to that fire.
Speaking of the media, let's talk about the Dear Boss letter.
The letter that gave Jack his name.
Exactly. Received by the Central News Agency in September 1888. Signed, of course, Jack the Ripper. Now, it's widely believed to be a hoax, but It cemented that name in the public consciousness.
It did. It's amazing, isn't it? How a simple letter, potentially a hoax, could have such a profound impact.
Well, it speaks to the power of language,
Doesn't it?
of how a name, a phrase can really capture the public imagination and, well, I suppose, shape the narrative surrounding an event
Precisely. And then you have the Saucy Jackie postcard, and of course the From Hell letter.
with its rather gruesome little gift.
Half a human kidney,
Preserved in ethanol.
preserved in ethanol, yes. The writer claimed to have fried and eaten the other half.
Now, that's a chilling detail.
It is.
Did they ever confirm if the kidney was actually from one of the victims?
A surgeon did examine it, confirmed it was human, but he couldn't determine any other characteristics.
So it's possible, but it could have been a hoax, a rather twisted prank.
It could have been, yes.
Either way, it definitely adds to the mystique of the case.
It does, and I think that's part of the reason why the Ripper case has continued to fascinate people for over a century.
It's the uncertainty, isn't it?
The uncertainty, the lack of a definitive answer.
It allows our imaginations to run wild.
We create our own narratives, our own theories, and we try, each of us, to solve the puzzle for ourselves.
It's a giant historical game of Cluedo, but with, well, much higher stakes.
Precisely. And the historical setting itself, it just adds to the allure.
Victorian London.
Victorian London.
The one.
Fog-shrouded streets, the gaslight.
It's like stepping back in time.
It is.
Yeah.
To a world where darkness and danger, well, they really did lurk around every corner.
It's easy to get caught up in the mystery and the intrigue, but it's important to remember that these were real people.
Absolutely.
Real women whose lives were brutally cut short.
They were not just names on a police report.
They were daughters, mothers, sisters.
They had lives, hopes, dreams.
And those were stolen from them in the most horrific way imaginable.
And their stories, unfortunately, are a stark reminder of the social inequalities that existed in Victorian London.
The Ripper's victims were the most vulnerable members of society,
They were poor, marginalized, often forgotten.
and their deaths exposed the dark underbelly of the city.
The poverty and desperation that festered beneath that veneer of Victorian respectability.
The Ripper case, in a way, acted as a catalyst for social reform.
You could say that, yes. The horrific nature of the crimes, combined with the intense media spotlight, it forced the authorities to confront the reality of poverty in the East End.
So, in a sense, Jack the Ripper unwittingly became an agent of change.
In a way, yes. The public outcry that followed the murders, it spurred a wave of social reform efforts.
Aimed at improving housing, sanitation, working conditions for the poor.
Of course, these changes didn't happen overnight, and many would argue that they didn't go far enough.
But the Ripper case undeniably played a role in highlighting the need for change.
It pushed the issue to the forefront of public consciousness.
It's a bittersweet legacy, isn't it? Positive change emerging from such darkness and tragedy.
It is.
But it does speak to the power of public outrage and the ability of even the most horrific events to spark meaningful progress.
Indeed. It's a reminder that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, we can find the strength to demand better, to fight for a more just and compassionate society.
It's an inspiring thought, and one that I think is particularly relevant today.
I agree.
We live in a world where we're constantly bombarded with news of violence, injustice, inequality.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed.
To feel like our voices don't matter.
But the Ripper case, I think, it reminds us that even the most horrific events can be catalysts for change.
That our collective outrage, our demands for justice, they can make a difference.
It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit.
That even in the face of such horror, we can find the strength to demand better, to fight for a more just and compassionate society. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why the Jack the Ripper case continues to fascinate us.
Perhaps.
It's a reminder that even the most baffling mysteries, the most seemingly impenetrable darkness, they could eventually lead to light.
It's a story about the darkness that lurks within us all, but also about our capacity for hope, for resilience, and for change.
You know, it's remarkable, isn't it? Over 100 years later, and Jack the Ripper is still such a cultural phenomenon.
Oh, he is.
People are still churning out books and films. There are walking tours, even museums dedicated to the murders. What is it about this case that continues to capture our imaginations?
I'd say it's a combination of factors, really. The unsolved nature of the case is, well, it's obviously a major draw. That lack of a definitive answer, it lets our minds wander.
Doesn't it? We create our own narratives, try to solve the puzzle ourselves.
Exactly.
Like a giant game of Cluedo, but with, well, considerably higher stakes.
Indeed. And historical setting that plays a part too, wouldn't you say?
Oh, Victorian London. With its fog, the gaslight, it's so evocative, so romantic.
Almost gothic. Perfect for tales of mystery and intrigue.
And of course, we can't forget the sheer brutality of the crimes.
No, no.
They really do tap into our deepest fears, don't they? Reminding us that even in a civilized society, darkness can lurk around any corner.
Quite right. There's something about the savagery of those Ripper murders that both horrifies and, well, fascinates us. It forces us to confront that darker side of human nature, doesn't it? That potential for violence and cruelty.
Yes, and it's a chilling reminder that evil can wear many faces. It can hide in plain sight.
You can.
And perhaps, sometimes it's better not to know the answer, to leave the mystery unsolved.
Why do you say that?
Well, because what if it reveals something truly disturbing about ourselves?
That's a very interesting thought. Perhaps there is a certain comfort in the unknown, in the idea that some mysteries are best left, well, unsolved.
Well, listener, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of Jack the Ripper. We've explored the grim realities of Victorian London, the chilling details of the murders, the media frenzy, and the legacy that continues to haunt us even today. What are your lasting thoughts on this enduring mystery?
I think it's a case that serves as a stark reminder, really, of the complexities of human nature,
Hmm.
the fragility of life, and the enduring power of fear and fascination.
It reminds us that the past is never truly gone. It continues to shape our present in ways we may not even fully comprehend. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.